to today's webinar. This is an HR update, what you need to know and what you need to know now. So a lot of things have changed over the last couple of years. And so we have asked Jodi Schafer, she is one of our MCA consultants for human resources, to give a presentation on human resource updates and things that you would need to know for your company. She is from SPHR Human Resources Management Services, located in Williamston. I would like to point out for all of our members on here, member companies, Ms. Schafer provides 1 hour of free consultation per month for MCA member companies. So if there's something in this presentation that you want to talk in more detail about, or you have questions about, she has 1 hour of free consultation per month for our member employee or our member companies. And without further ado, Jodi, I'd like to turn it over to you and let us know what we need to know about HR and what's coming down the line.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that you've now offered this in a virtual format. I know I was supposed to be live in front of all of your members at your conference, and was on my way to Kalamazoo when I got the call that a tree had fallen and the hotel was without power. So I'll do my best to make this as lively as I think it would have been had I been standing in front of you face to face. But I've been asked to give an update on some HR related topics, really specifically focused on recruiting and retention. We know it's a really tight labor market out there. And so I wanted to provide some data and statistics for your group to help better understand what we're up against and whether or not we think it's going to change anytime soon. So as Heather said, I'm the owner of HRM Services. We're a consulting and training company here in Williamston, Michigan, and I've had the pleasure of working with MCA members for many years now. So if my voice sounds familiar to you, that may be why. So for today, I wanted to talk about some workforce projections and how you as an employer can respond to the current market, especially as I think that it's not going to loosen anytime soon. I want to talk about culture's impact on retention. It's hard enough to find folks, and if we're going to invest in training and get them up to the point where they're actually a valuable producer for us, we want them to stay as long as possible. So what are some things we can be doing to improve the odds that an employee stays with us long term? I do, if I have time, want to talk on mental health in the workplace. We are coming out of COVID, but COVID certainly isn't the only traumatic event that employees have experienced, and it does take a toll, and we're seeing it on the HR side more and more. So I want to touch on that too, and we'll see if we have time for that. So let's jump right in here. I think the first topic is sort of the shift in the workforce, and if you hear nothing else from me today, I hope that you take away the notion that the shift we're seeing in workforce participation is not temporary. So I wanted to go over some current statistics, and I do think that COVID really exposed kind of a tipping of the workforce scale, but this is not solely because of COVID. And I think COVID just sort of exacerbated what was already on the horizon, and wanted to talk about this supply and demand imbalance that we're experiencing right now. So let me just start by sharing with all of you who are listening what the current workforce participation rate is here in Michigan. And by workforce participation rate, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as labor participation, what that's measuring is the percentage of individuals who are of age to work who are actually in the workforce. So they carve out anyone who is incapacitated or incarcerated. And then of those remaining, they say, okay, well, how many of these folks are actually working in our state? And in Michigan, only 60% of folks who could be working are working. So let that number just sink in for a moment here. 60%. When you look at Michigan as compared to other states across our nation, that 60% is low. We are somewhere between 39th and 40th in the nation for our workforce participation rate. So this is not anything to brag about. And for those of you that have been employers in our state for any number of years, you know that this is not new. Michigan has historically ranked lower than many, lower than most of our neighbors across the nation here. So we are already experiencing a pinch in our workforce because of that labor participation rate. And then when you throw the pandemic on top of it, I want to talk a little bit about kind of pre-pandemic numbers, post-pandemic numbers here. Certainly, we still have less individuals in our workforce post-pandemic as we did when you look at March of 2020. And there are certain segments of our workforce where that has really been a problem. There are still fewer women in our workforce now than there were, fewer millennials, and fewer Black, Indigenous people of color. Part of that is because of the industries that were significantly affected by the pandemic, especially here in Michigan. We had whole industries that were shuttered for months and months and months. And hospitality, food service, some of those industries were hardest hit, and they took the longest to come back. And women, millennials, and Black, Indigenous, and people of color were employed in those industries in higher amounts than in some other industries. So partially this is due to the industry impact that COVID had, but not completely. Now, when we talk about women, women's participation in our workforce in Michigan hasn't been this low since the 80s. Part of that reason is because of childcare. For those of you that have childcare age children, you know what I'm talking about. So COVID sort of exacerbated this reduction in available childcare options for your children. Many individuals that had in-home childcare centers closed those during COVID and did not reopen them. It's a low wage earning profession. There's a lot of risk. And so, especially in a labor market like we have right now, where there's a lot of option for folks to go into other industries, you're seeing an exodus from childcare. So oftentimes women are the primary caregivers within a family dynamic. And so if you don't have childcare for your children, sometimes women are having to stay home or at least work a reduced schedule in order to manage that. But what's really interesting, and I think what folks don't give a lot of thought to, is that we actually have 4 times as many people out of the workforce caring for adults or elderly families.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's okay. So we had a slight hiccup there in the recording. So it's back on now. And as I was saying, while we know we've got folks out of work caring for children right now, we actually have 4 times as many people out of the workforce caring for adult or elderly family members as we do those out caring for children. So some of you listening to this may be in what's referred to as the sandwich generation, where you have aging family members that you have to care for at the same time you still have children in the home that you have to care for. And there are only so many hours in the day, so people are being stretched thin and having to exit the workforce, in a way that wouldn't necessarily be if they're choosing, but they feel like they have no other option. So that's important to keep in mind, because when I get to the point of the presentation where I talk about what employers can do about this, building flexibility into your work schedules is going to be one of those tactics, and this is why. And then, of course, we've heard about the Great Resignation. That was a term that was sort of coined on the back end of COVID as people were starting to come back to work. There was this question about, will folks come back? And then that term was recoined the Great Reshuffle, because what we saw was that, yes, folks were coming back to work, but maybe not in the jobs that they had previously. When you have a worldwide pandemic, it does make you stop and reevaluate priorities. And, it's a kind of a wake-up call that your future isn't guaranteed. And we have a lot of individuals in our workforce that we're starting to put some thought to, is this really how I want to spend my last remaining years in this type of company or in this type of profession? And so we did see folks enter the workforce again post-COVID, but maybe in a completely different job than what they had before. So that's kind of where COVID stepped in. But as I said, COVID just exposed this tipping point that was already going to be our reality. And so what I've shown you here is kind of Michigan's labor participation rate over time. You'll see in 2020 that drastic drop due to COVID. It popped back up again, but then, fell. So we're still kind of in a tight labor market. And as this slide says, that's not daylight ahead, folks. I think, there's a train that's coming right at us. So let's look at, projections for our workforce. So you can see here in this graph, it's got, every 10 years from 1994 up through projections through next year of the percentage of workforce made up by different age groups. So one of the things that you'll notice on this graph is that from 2004 to 2014 and now in 2024, a higher and higher percentage of our workforce is being made up of older and older workers. And a smaller percentage of our workforce is being made up of younger workers. And so that's really flip-flopped in the last 30 years. If you compare 1994 to 2004, for example, and you look at that youngest cohort, 16 to 24-year-olds, in 1994, that age group made up 66.4% of our workforce. But if you look at the projections for next year, that age group is going to make up less than half of our workforce. That 25 to 54-year-old has remained somewhat constant throughout, but where you really start to then see the shift on the back end is the older workers, 55 and above, staying in the workforce longer, making up a higher percentage of our workforce. Part of this, that reduction in the younger cohort, part of that is because right around that time, the 90s, mid to late 90s, is when the push for college really hit high schools. And there was that messaging that, in order to have any kind of a quality of life, you had to have a college degree. Now, I know that's not true. You all know that's not true, but that was the message that was spoon-fed to any high schooler, right, that came of age during that period of time. And so we saw college admissions rise drastically, and no coincidence, so did the cost of college. Again, a little supply-demand equation there for you. But if folks are in college up through the age of 22, they're probably not in the workforce during that same period of time. So part of this reduction is because college became so big during that period, but it's not the full story. And then, of course, for our older generation, for some of them, just healthcare has improved to the point where you can stay in the workforce longer. But as many of you know, if you're, sitting in your late 50s, early 60s, you're starting to look at retirement and wondering whether or not you have enough money set aside to retire. We had a bear stock market for a number of years, but it's dropped off. And so folks are staying in the workforce longer, not necessarily because they want to, but because they feel like they have to. So let's sort of keep on this path where we're looking at future projections here. Nationally, our birth rate has been down for 6 consecutive years. And in Michigan, we actually had more people die last year than were born here. That's true for 2020 and 2021. So again, in our state, we already have a participation rate that is low. We're not fully maximizing all of our individuals in the state who are of work age. They're not actually in our workforce. But we also have this declining population, and that's a concern. There's been a decline in our net population growth here in Michigan, and that's been going on for several years here. And for those that are leaving the state, they have a median age of 30, and 45% of them have a college degree. So you may have heard, that Michigan is an exporter of our talent. And that's true, statistically speaking. So that's a problem. I do wonder, though, with the rise in telework, whether that will continue to be the case. Individuals could still choose to work elsewhere, outside of the state, but could continue to live in Michigan while they do it if the job was remote or potentially hybrid, which, doesn't necessarily help an employer in the moment, but if they're not leaving our state, there's a chance that you could potentially attract and recruit them to your job much more easily if they don't leave Michigan. So, just a thought there. I don't know whether telework will help or hurt. But right now, our net population growth continues to decline. Another sobering statistic has to do with who is in our workforce here in Michigan. I showed you that slide earlier where it broke down labor participation by age and by cohort. In Michigan, as of 2019, so this is about 4 years old now, but in 2019, in Michigan, over 22% of our workforce was made up of baby boomers. 22%. And so over the next 5 to 7 years, so we're right in that period right now, right? We're 4 years out from that data point. So in the next year to 3 years, it's expected that 1 million job vacancies will come open because of the boomers, that those boomers will leave 1 million open jobs to fill. Now, it's probably not a one-for-one match, right? A job that's vacated by a boomer today may not be a job that you need to fill tomorrow, right? There are changes to your processes and the way in which you work, but still, that's huge. That is huge. And in Michigan, just to give you some sort of scale here, we only have 10 million people in our state. So 1 million vacancies left by boomers in the next 5 to 7 years, and we only have 10 million people in our state. And as I said, only 60% of those that are of age to work are actually working. So you can see where the deficit comes in. Then you add on top of that, that boomers don't have the same attitudes about work that the incoming workers do, right? Millennials and Gen Z think very differently about how many hours is the right amount of hours and how much flexibility is expected / required. And what does loyalty look like, to an employer? Those things are very, very different depending on which generation you're talking to. So a job that might have been filled by one boomer may have to be filled by 2 Gen Z employees, right? Just depending on how many hours they want to work and how long they're going to stay with you. So again, it's not a one-for-one match. So when I say that that's not daylight ahead, folks, that's a train coming, this is what I mean. COVID sort of exposed this crisis, but based on these numbers, birth rates, labor participation rates, age cohorts that are in the workforce, and Michigan's population breakup, it doesn't look good. These are problems that we're dealing with now, but these are going to continue to be problems that we have to face going forward. One other change here that may in fact impact our listeners, I'm not sure here on your side within your industry, but there's also been an increase in independent contractors. So the number of folks that want to be self-employed is growing, and we're seeing that in Michigan too. So they might be in the workforce, so to speak, but they're not interested in a W-2 employee-employer relationship. They instead want to come work for you as an independent contractor, which gives them maximum flexibility, and perhaps you too, but it comes with a higher price tag. So just some current changes. I'll pause there for a moment and see if we have any questions. I know I've just thrown a lot of data at you.
Jodi, does it look like we have anything in the chat or question and answer? Okay. I will kind of keep monitoring those as we go.
Okay, perfect. Just a few other data points here. I've talked about sort of nationally where we sit. I've talked about some Michigan specific numbers, but I do want to point out that this is not affecting every county in Michigan equally. So this was a slide here that I pulled from Cranes, Detroit. And this showed the population change for Michigan counties from 2010 to 2020. So you can see for counties that have blue lines, right, that are going in the positive direction, they've actually experienced population growth. But then, of course, you have counties that are below that line going in the negative that are highlighted here in red that have seen a population loss. So depending on where your place of business is located, you may be feeling this pinch more or less than others across the state, just because of how attractive your county is for people to want to come and live and then hopefully potentially work. So given the industry that you all are in, I thought it was important to also point out where some of the blue collar positions sit when we look at these numbers. So Deloitte & Touche is an accounting firm. So Deloitte and then the Manufacturing Institute combined and did a study, and they found that between 2018 and 2028, there could be as many as 2.4 million unfilled manufacturing jobs. Now, I know that your industry may not be specific to manufacturing, but a lot of the work that you supply, right, is in that manufacturing pipeline and the building of some of those manufacturing facilities. So you could expand this to be sort of all blue collar positions. And they give several reasons for this. One of them, right, was that baby boomer exodus. We talked about that previously. Another one is just that they call it dismal growth in the working age population. So that idea that folks who are of prime age, 16, to 25, 30 years old, there are less and less of them in the workforce now as compared to 30 years ago, right? We showed that graph earlier. And there's also changing attitudes about what it means to work. So even if that individual was in your workforce, they may not be willing to put in the same number of hours that somebody who was in that boomer generation would put in. Another reason, just that disappointing recovery in the overall labor participation rate. This is kind of on the heels of COVID. And then finally, and this is really interesting, men without college degrees are less likely to work. I don't know what all goes into that. I can share the link to that study if any of our listeners wanted to dive into it a little bit more. But the data shows that, we have less men in our workforce, men who are capable of working, eligible and able to work. But if they don't have a college degree, we are less likely to see them in the workforce. And then again, the one that we talked about, we have more young adults pursuing college degrees versus skilled trades. I think this is starting to taper off a bit for a couple of reasons. One, I think the myth that you needed a college degree in order to have a certain quality of life has proven to not be true in all cases. And we've had enough generations of folks go through the college system and come out the other side with very few job prospects and a lot of student loan debt that we've seen that sort of play out, and the promise of this quality of life that you would have if you went to college isn't necessarily true in all cases. So there is some, I think, more informed decision making on the front end for students that are coming out of high school in terms of what they want to pursue and whether or not a college degree is necessary for them to earn a living. And then, of course, I think the messaging around skilled trades and what skilled trades means and how you can really carve a life for yourself and have a lot of autonomy and be a business owner if you want to do that. That messaging has gotten much better. So those two things combined, I think, is starting to shift this a little bit, but we still have a disproportionate number of young adults pursuing college degrees versus skilled trades. And so that's impacting this number of projected unfilled jobs. Okay, I just wanted to share one other piece here, and then we'll shift into, so what do we do about it, right? So Peter Capelli, who's with the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, was quoted as saying, "We cut back on vocational education programs starting a generation ago in the belief that those programs tracked students into dead-end jobs. Today, employers want people who already have the skills that in the past they would have gotten through that type of training. Everyone wants someone with 5 years experience, but no one wants to provide that experience. Union apprentice programs have dried up And the only real place to get those skills now is at community colleges. Welding, for example, is typically a 2-year program in community colleges. So again, Peter's just sort of highlighting this shift in what employers want, what employers have historically provided in terms of opportunity for unexperienced but excited, individuals early in their career, and how that shift is now negatively impacting employers and new employees alike. And so it kind of goes to this idea of, what we need to do in a lot of ways is we need to go back to some of these old school tactics, things that worked for us. And one of them is this grow your own talent strategy. So there's kind of some short-term ways that you can do it and some more long-term, and I'll talk about that. But per Peter's comment, it used to be, especially in skilled trades, and you all know this if you're listening to this program, if you've been in the workforce for, more than 2 decades, you can probably remember co-ops, right? And the opportunity for high school students to shadow or potentially work within your place of business to get some hands-on training and skills. Maybe there were apprentice opportunities, et cetera, to really provide them the training they need to be successful when they're young, and endear them to your place of business. And then we got away from that for a number of reasons. But I think if we really want to combat this shrinking labor pool and acknowledge that it's highly competitive, the folks that are in that pool are being sought after by many, many individuals and many, many companies. Thinking that we can have open positions, post those positions, and then we're just going to have qualified applicants applying is proven to be kind of a fool's dream at this point. So one of the strategies that I'm recommending is that you invest in building your own talent. So as I say, post and pray isn't enough anymore. We have to lean into some of the networks that you already have access to. And I'm thinking old school here, like talk to your current staff, right? Do they have kids that might need a summer job? These might be kids that think they have their future all planned out, and then perhaps they come work for you for the summer, and then they realize they actually really like it. They like working with their hands. They like not being stuck behind a desk all the time. They like actually building things. And maybe they get exposed to other individuals within your place of work that have built an entire career out of this. And it opens up their mind to a track that they hadn't previously considered. So talking to your current staff, making sure that you're tapping into their families is always a good place to start. Who do they know? Do they have a niece, a nephew, something like that? We do have to consider incentives to sign on with you. That's just where we're at right now in terms of our job market. And so you're seeing that more and more, kind of these sign-on bonuses. But I think it's a mistake to look at only incentives to start. I think you also need to look at incentives to stay. Because remember, your current employees, the ones that you've already invested in, the ones that you've already trained, right, that have real on-the-job experience, that are valuable to you, they are some of the most highly sought after employees in the job market right now. And they don't necessarily have to be out looking for an opportunity in order for one to be set right in front of them, right? Just like I'm encouraging you to tap into your networks, that's what other employers are doing too. And so your very valuable employee may get a call from a friend of theirs who works somewhere else, who says, hey, we're hiring. Have you ever thought about making a move? And so this was a passive job seeker, right? They weren't out on a job board. They weren't thinking that they needed to make a change, but this very lucrative opportunity gets put in front of them. Well, what's to keep them connected to you? So we want to make sure that it's not just your new employees that are incentivized to come and join your team, but that you also have strategies for your current employees, the ones that are most valuable to you, to remain with you. And whether you do that through incentives, whether you take a look internally at your pay programs to make sure that they are competitive, right? As you increase starting wages, you also have to look at the wages of everybody else on your payroll, because if the starting wages are going up, wage compression is probably starting to occur where you have less and less room between a starting rate of pay and the rate of pay that somebody with 5 years experience has. So you may have to adjust internally those other rates of pay to remain competitive, and that would be another incentive to stay. So those are some short-term strategies for how you find folks. But on the long-term side, this is where I go into the grow your own talent idea. Starting early, like junior high, high school presentations. And I know that skilled trades as an industry, as a group, as a workforce, is putting more money and more attention behind this. But I think as an employer, you can contact the counselor at your local high school, whatever high schools are in the vicinities of places that you have job opportunities, and you can reach out to those counselors and ask, do they have like a career event that they put on for their students? Are there opportunities to come in and talk with certain classes about job opportunities? Can you somehow connect to the skilled trades program at that high school? Maybe you've got somebody on staff that wants to come in and do some teaching for one of those lessons, right? Or maybe you can provide opportunities for co-op or job shadow, but start to build those relationships directly with the junior highs and high schools in your area and start to build those feeder systems. Another thing I'm seeing more and more of is the use of technology or virtual reality or social media to like show kids what the possibilities are. So it's not just a person standing in front of them talking about their job, but there's actual video, or you can have this immersive experience that's put into those VR goggles, so that somebody who might want to know what it's like to work in the concrete industry, like they can see it. It's pictures of job sites, and it's shot from the point of view of somebody who's working that day, and there's some cool graphics and music or whatever, right? But you're trying to capture the attention of a group of individuals that is constantly bombarded with video and the ability to immerse themselves in an experience. So I think when you talk about your job, especially these long-term strategies and trying to hook youth into skilled trades and into your industry, you've got to go beyond just a talking head and a poster board. So investing in some of that and really employing your marketing department to get more involved there is going to be big. We talked a little bit about co-op, apprenticeship programs. Anytime you can give students and new employees an opportunity to experience the work firsthand, it's better for you, it's better for them. And those apprenticeship programs create connection, because they're often several years in length. And at the end of the apprenticeship program, perhaps there's licensure that the individual can sit for. And so there's a vested interest on your part to provide that sort of opportunity and the dollars and the time involved in it. But there's also an investment on the part of the individual going through that program, that they got their training from you. And hopefully that buys you some loyalty on the back end. You could consider creating scholarship programs for local high school graduates that know they want to pursue the skilled trades. Again, that's kind of a PR thing, get your name out there, be a kind of a best in brand or a best in show, so to speak, for your industry, especially within your community. And then internally, another long-term strategy is to create these career ladders. And what I mean by that is you can map out for individuals that, look, you start in this entry level role, but from here you could go in any one of these 4 or 5 different directions, right? Here are some of the job titles associated with those. Here's what the work looks like in any of those areas. Here's some of the training and certification and licensure you might need. Here's the earning potential, that kind of thing, and really create a visual map for someone within your organization to know, what is possible for them within your organization. They don't have to leave your place of business to find growth and opportunity and development. It can be right there, but sometimes we've not done a good job of laying that out in a way that people understand and that they can grab a hold of. So I think that's a pretty low cost way to create some retention. Another one is rotation opportunities. So, maybe you've got 5 or 6 different positions within your company that a person could eventually move into, and maybe you don't have an opportunity for them to move into that position just yet, but perhaps you could create a rotation where they can shadow somebody in that role for a period of time. And it just keeps the work fresh and exciting. Remember, many of the individuals that are in that younger cohort, younger millennials, and especially this Gen Z group that's coming into the workforce now, their attention span is not the same as what a Gen X or a boomer's attention span was, right? They're not willing necessarily to stay in a job for 3 to 5 years and then have an opportunity to be promoted into something new. Everything in their life is almost instant and on demand. And so while you may not be able to promote them as quickly as they would love to be promoted, you can at least create rotation opportunities so that they can see what other positions are like, and they feel like they're learning something new, even though their job title might not change. So just thinking about, we have a question?
We do have a question, and I don't know if you're moving away from the microphone, but your voice kind of trails off at times. So
I probably am. I'll lean right in here.
Okay, that would be great. The question, and I hate to interrupt in here, but one of our attendees asked, where is that 16 to 24 age group working? I mean, do you know if they have any long-term plans to make ends meet, or are they just kind of trying to figure it out?
So that's a great question. I don't know that we have all the answers yet, but anecdotally, I can tell you that many of the individuals in that cohort are still living at home. Part of the reason they're living at home might be that they're going to school right now, and so they don't have the means to, have an apartment, or they're not being required to have a job and go to school at the same time. For individuals that have come out of school, the student loan debt is astronomical. The cost of college continues to rise. And so you have folks that have come out of school perhaps with a degree, and they would love to be in the workforce and paying their own way, but they can't afford to. Between what they're paying back in student loan, they can't afford to make rent, let alone buy eggs at, $4 a dozen. So they're living at home with mom and dad. And when you're living at home with mom and dad, sometimes there isn't necessarily the impetus to get out and start working. You can kind of sit back a little bit and wait for that right job to come along. And so I think we're seeing a lot of that too. They're being subsidized perhaps by family. They may be subsidized by state and federal aid. They may be working, but maybe it's like side gigs. You've heard of the gig economy. So they're doing a little bit, here and a little bit there, kind of on their own terms to make ends meet, but they are prioritizing their free time and their life above the need to, put food on the table, because again, maybe they've got that need taken care of in other ways.
Well, and I think that goes right into this grow your own talent. That's why I brought the question up, is we have to find a way to get that instilled in them early so that hopefully when they're out of school, they can continue that.
Right.
So those were the only 2 questions I have. Well, sorry for interrupting. I'll let you go.
No, that's fine. And I've been leaning in. Is my voice better?
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. So sorry about that. Okay. So another thing I wanted to bring up here, because when you think about both these short-term strategies and some of these long-term strategies, it takes an investment of time, but it also takes a financial investment as well. And so I wanted your listeners to know that there are some resources out there to help with some of this. So one of those is the Going Pro Talent Fund. So this is a state of Michigan resource. There's currently 55 million available for funding. And this is all accessed through your local Michigan Works agency. But this Going Pro Talent Fund, what it does is it allows employers, sorry, let me go back to this here. It allows employers to submit requests through their local Michigan Works for these training grants. And the grants can be $2,000 each. So $2,000 per employee that you are submitting the grant on behalf of, or for registered apprentice programs up to $3,500 per employee. So employers can submit these grant requests through their local Michigan Works for any sort of training that they need for their employee that would result in a credential, a certificate, a certification, a licensure, or perhaps academic credit. So as employers are putting together their training programs, if there's a portion of the training that they want to send the employee out to an external vendor or something, it's going to cost X amount of dollars. They could potentially get that paid for by the state. So there are two different application cycles for this. One was at the tail end of 2022, but the other one I think is open perhaps through May of 2023. And those dollars can be used in this calendar year or next. Now, this administration in Michigan has signaled that this is going to be a key priority. They've actually put more dollars into it this year than they had in it last year. So this will likely continue to be a funding mechanism for employers to utilize, at least for the next 3 years. So keep an eye on that. Again, if you go to your local Michigan Works website, they'll have information on Going Pro Talent right on there. So you can see the application dates, you can see the paperwork that needs to be filled out. But I have several of my clients that have utilized this very successfully, and it's now become just part of their budget. So that's one question. That's one resource.
Jodi,
like we've got a question here. Would that work for CDL training? Potentially. I think that's a great question, Deanna. Your local Michigan Works can answer that for you. But if that CDL training is going to result in a certificate or a licensure, then I think it would qualify. Another program that I wanted to just draw your attention to here, it's called Michigan Reconnect. Again, this is a Michigan, a state resource. It provides free tuition for an employee to attend community college. And they can use the dollars to complete an associate's degree or a skills certificate. And this is for employees that are 25 years old or older who have at least a high school diploma or a GED. So the idea here is that you may have employees in your workforce right now that came to you right out of high school, perhaps, or they're 25 years or older, and they have some of the basic skills you're looking for, but you want to upskill them. Maybe you want them to get, I'm just going to say like a welding degree, right? If I go back to that Peter quote earlier, where community colleges are offering 2-year programs in welding, then perhaps this Michigan Reconnect program could be what pays for that. So it could be an employer funded benefit, but the dollars can be coming from the state. So if you Google Michigan Reconnect, you'll get all the information on that program as well. So those are just two, and maybe there are more, but I wanted to make sure that you had a way to sort of fund this training and development initiative that I'm pushing you to consider. Any other questions on that you see, Heather?
I do not. It looks like I think that answered that question.
Okay. So let me just spend the last handful of minutes here talking about culture. And this again is part attraction and part retention strategy. That it's not about what employees want anymore, it's about what employees expect. And remember that we have this supply-demand conundrum. So job seekers are absolutely in the driver's seat right now. And based on some of the data I shared with you at the start of this presentation, that's not due to change anytime soon. So employers have to start thinking about, how do I make not just the job attractive, but how do I, once people start working for me, how do I keep them in the work? And it's about more than money, I'm going to tell you. I mean, certainly you have to offer a competitive rate of pay, but it's about more than money. So Pew Research did a survey on reasons that people voluntarily leave their job. Okay, so I'm going to share with you some of the key ones. The first one is low pay, okay? Especially in this job market, with the rising cost of inflation, the employee may really love what they do and they might like working for you, but if they get a lead on a job that's going to pay them $3 or $4 or $5 more an hour, it's tough to turn that down. So pay is always a consideration when folks leave voluntarily, but lack of opportunity for advancement rates just as high as low pay. 63% of folks that voluntarily left a position left because they didn't see any opportunity for them in that role or in that company long term. That's why I think it's so important that you put together some of those career paths and that you create opportunities for job shadowing and job rotations right within your workforce. Because if people feel like they have to leave in order to learn a new skill or have a new opportunity, then you are going to be in the state of constantly having to hire. And the folks leaving often are the ones with the most skill and the most institutional knowledge. So you're going to be in a losing proposition if that's the case. Another reason that people voluntarily leave, and this one is just gut-wrenching, for me who works in HR, feeling disrespected at work. 57% say this is why they left. We as employers have control over how people feel in our workplace. We have a lot more control than we think we do. And part of this is, the values that we hold dear, the expectations we hold our team to. When somebody's not meeting those expectations, even if they're a strong worker, being brave enough to call them out on it. Because if you have a workplace that feels toxic to other employees, they're not going to stay, especially in this job market, they're not going to stay. So this culture piece becomes really, really important. And then you'll see some of the other reasons here. Childcare, we talked about. Flexibility is really huge, especially for individuals that have competing priorities and other demands in their personal life that are non-negotiable. And then we've got the benefits, et cetera. So you can kind of see how this all plays out here. But I really wanted to draw your attention to the lack of opportunity for advancement, or at least the perceived lack of opportunity, and that feeling disrespected at work. Because I think as employers, that's something that we can get our arms around and start making inroads on. And it's not dependent upon the labor market, right? That's just good work principle right there. Did we have another question?
No, we just
helping good employees. Oh, yes.
There was just a comment.
Yeah. Yep. I absolutely agree. Okay. So on this topic of culture here, there was a Robert Half survey that was done. It said nearly 4 in 10 professionals feel that their career has stalled since the start of the pandemic. And when you look at that younger cohort, the one that we're trying to involve in our workforce more and more, 66% of them feel this way. And nearly 1 in 3 workers whose feelings have changed, they cite an interest in trying to pursue more meaningful or fulfilling work. Remember, your employees have options right now. And so part of making your job attractive is not just the wages, the benefits, the work hours. It's how does it feel to work for you with this team? And what is the real impact of their daily tasks? What is it all building towards? And the more you can create that connection between the work that your most junior level employee does to the final work outputs that the team produces and how that impacts, a supply chain or the economy as a whole, or how that improves a community, the better off you're going to be, because people are looking for meaningful work. And sometimes it's up to you, the employer, to connect those dots because they're not doing it on their own. And then just some final comments here on culture. This is for a Society for Human Resource Management survey. 46% of job seekers said culture was one of the deciding factors when deciding which jobs to apply for. And for millennials, and this is going to be true for Gen Z too, they prioritize people and culture fit above everything else. Remember, many of the individuals in those younger cohorts are being subsidized in some way. Perhaps they're still living at home, right? But they have the luxury of choice that maybe other generations didn't have. And so being able to sit back and pick a job because it feels right or it aligns with what they ultimately want to do might even be more important than starting pay and benefits. So from an employer perspective, you have to be looking at all of these things in order to not only attract talent, but to keep the talent, okay? So with this, I'm gonna just stop because we're coming up on the hour here. For those of you that are watching, and Heather, I'll share with you my slide deck. I did have a third topic on mental health, just because this is cropping up more and more on the HR side. It's not necessarily in line with attracting and retaining talent, but I just wanted to make sure that those on the receiving end of this did have the full slide deck. So there are some slides here on mental health, and then what you as the employer can do about it.
That's awesome, Jodi. We do have another presentation that we had as well to go with that. So I will attach your slide deck though to the presentation so that if anyone has any questions or they want to go back, they're able to reach out to you.
Yep, that's great. So I'll just leave you all with this last piece here, and Dan, I don't know if you all share these or not, but on our website, you can sign up for our free monthly videos. So if you like this kind of information, I put out a video every month. It's like 5 to 10 minutes long. And it's talking about kind of what you need to know. Now sometimes it's employment law related, sometimes it's leadership related, sometimes it's talent related. But if you like to just kind of keep your finger on the pulse, that's a really quick way to do it. And again, they're free. So feel free to sign up on our website if that's of interest to you. And I'll just kind of leave it there with any final questions, perhaps.
It doesn't look like we have any questions, Jodi. Again, to those of you who attended, thank you for attending. Jodi, thank you so much. This was a great webinar. Oh, looks like we might have one question. Oh, it just says, thank you for the hot HR topics, Jodi. They're great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we appreciate you giving us your time. Again, this will be recorded, and it is recorded, and it'll be uploaded on our website with her slide deck. And we have her contact information as well. If you are a member, again, you can have a free hour of consultation. And with that, Jodi, thank you again. This stuff's great stuff, helping us do better every day in our jobs.
Yeah.
And so we appreciate your time today. And with that, I'm going to close out this webinar.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Jodi, and everyone have a great afternoon.